Every week, Sean brings me the weekly roundup in podcasting, what happened in the industry. Sean, what have you got for me today?
First up, we've got Spotify has launched some new discovery metrics for their podcast analytics platform. We actually talked about this last week. Spotify recently purchased Chartable and has been integrating a lot of their features into their services. This new discovery metrics shows a funnel of where people are picking up or following through your podcast. Now, what's interesting is that you can look at things like specific titles, thumbnail art, all sorts of different things to get an idea for what's bringing people into your podcast and then where you're losing them. And then you can figure out ways to optimize for those specific things.
Interesting. Can you explain this to me a bit more? So what does it look like?
So it looks like a funnel, and it shows you in a visual representation the impressions of where your show is being discovered by your audience.
If you sent out a link to people, if you put a link on your website or if you put a link on LinkedIn, something like that, it tells you all of that?
Yeah, whether it's an outside link or whether it's being discovered on the Spotify homepage through search or through recommendations from similar podcasts. You'll get this idea of exactly where people are finding your show.
And let's say, for example, that loads of people are finding it through search. You've got good SEO. People aren't finding it through search. You don't. That's interesting. Podcast SEO is a weird thing. The search on Apple Podcasts and stuff like that is shaky at best, should we say? So it's hard to get found through that. We'd say nowadays that YouTube, being a search engine, is ideal for findability. That might change things.
I think Spotify is learning a lot from YouTube in a way. YouTube is this massive platform and is becoming a big player in the podcasting space. To see Spotify learning from some of the ways that YouTube is really dominating that field, it makes a lot of sense.
We've always said that like your short form content and your YouTube is great for discoverability, and then the long form and the podcast, the audio experience is good for nurturing, which is true. But now if we add in this discoverability, it doesn't make it more discoverable, but it allows us to see where people are discovering it. So can you think of some use cases for this?
The first thing is based on where people are finding your podcast, you can figure out the best thing to optimize for. If people are finding your podcast through search, likely the two things that they're going to notice first are the cover art and the title. You're going to really want to nail those two things. Recommendations, it might be more of a topic fit. You can also find out where people are falling off of your podcast. If people are making it 20% of the way through, maybe it's like a solo show for the first few minutes, and then people are actually just really there to listen to you. That can inform the type of content that you're making for the show.
Bit of a story time. When I had a podcast back in the day, it was super highly edited to the point where we had a custom score for every episode. I then went on a motorcycle trip around Europe for a year, so it's like, I'm not doing that anymore. So I was like, I'm just going to record solo, me walking through Riga. That's in Latvia, by the way. No script, no nothing, just saying about my day, bringing up things from my past. My listenership soared after that. All people wanted was to listen to me walk around a town talking about nothing. I probably would have been able to see that earlier.
Exactly. Having all of this information can help you better figure out which metrics you should be paying the most attention to.
Another thing from the Swedes, man. Are Spotify the future of podcasts?
When they first got into the game, I was really skeptical, but they're innovating a lot, and I think that's important. They're changing the game. At the very least, they're going to be putting pressure on other platforms to start doing the same.
The biggest thing I think they've done is created that ability to host podcasts. That just allows them to do all these things. Otherwise, they're just a place where the RSS goes, and then you have limited availability, and you still have to track things using your RSS. But if they're the podcast provider, they can do whatever they want. And man, they rolled it out for free. Genius move. European pride. Let's go.
Next up, Veritonic, a podcasting analytics company, recently sent out a report about the importance of audio branding. Gary Vaynerchuk used to be beating this all the time about how important audio branding is. What we're seeing is that the majority of listeners feel a stronger connection with brands that have cohesive sound identities. People resonate with that brand. It's also interesting to find out that audio branding is more memorable than visual branding.
It's so Pavlovian. I love that this is getting brought up because audio branding has been a big part of what we do. You have the visual branding, which obviously is important, but it's like translating that to what it sounds like when we think about the senses and the things that bring about the emotions within us. At least for me, the biggest is smell, right? You smell something and you go, oh man, I remember that. Sound's gotta be the next one. It's super important. If your music is like Iron Maiden style compared to like a soft lo-fi hip hop, that's a completely different style. When we do audio branding, you've got things like you can take the stems. I'm just gonna take this drum loop or this keyboard section or whatever. That's gonna be my lead in to the the ad or whatever. Utilizing that method keeps it so consistent over the episode. They're also integrated into the audio branding seamlessly. I love that this is being talked about, man.
That's super, super important. It has a big impact on the way that a brand is perceived. We rely too much on visuals for our immediate sensory input. I don't think it sticks around too much in our memory. So it makes sense that sound would create more of an impact.
You know what's interesting? I have synesthesia, right? When you hear something, you can see it. You don't see it. You see it in your mind's eye, but it's very blurry. It's more like a kind of feeling. I can hear a kick drum and go, that is an orange circle. Let us know if you have the synesthesia as well. I can hear some music. It gives me that visual branding in a sense, because I'm like, wow, that feels purple, straight lines. And so therefore it's quite trustable and professional, not a useful thing at all. But I think it's super interesting. There is a match between that audio branding and the visual branding. Finding that match is one of the most important things. You match it to the voice. I love it.
This next one's interesting. This American Life, one of the biggest podcasts in the world, are launching a premium version of their podcast.
Did someone listen to Last Week in Podcasting last week, do you think?
If they didn't, they should, right? So primarily they have been running on an ad revenue service. Because of the massive listenership, they're one of the few podcasts that can make a lot of money off of ads. What they're finding is even with that listenership, their ad revenues dropped 33% in the last year.
Do they say why?
Just rates. The trend of what people are willing to pay for ads in podcasting is starting to go down. We were just getting out of an era where brands were willing to throw just buckets of money at podcasts. BetterHelp.
Squarespace, BetterHelp, the mattress one, the underwear one. God, I remember those days. You know what? I think I've bought one thing from podcast ads. Back in the day on the Tim Ferriss show, Ex Officio underwear. I don't even know if they're still a brand anymore. Tell you what, they were amazing. So I was traveling, lived in India and all this other stuff, right? 2 pairs of underwear. That's all you need because these underwear were so good. Am I sponsored by? No, I'm not. They were so good. You could get by with 1 pair. I have 2 just in case. You never know what happens, especially in India. Anyway, my point being, do I have a point? I don't think so.
Your point is if Ex Officio is still around, they need to be sponsoring us.
I will shill them all day long.
Definitely backs up what we were talking about last week. Ads are not the only way to monetize anymore. I don't think they can be. That's why we're seeing ad revenue drop. It's just spread too thin. There's more and more podcasts every day. They're getting bigger and bigger. People are listening to more shows. We're going to have to start seeing more direct ways of supporting companies. You can try to sell merch, maybe. Not everyone's going to want to buy a bunch of poorly branded t-shirts. If it is entertaining and people like listening, people would be willing to pay $1, $2 a month to listen. If it works for This American Life, that's going to be fantastic because they have something like 60 people on their staff. This is a massive podcast. They have the listeners. If they're able to be supported by just a small percentage of those listeners deciding, I'm going to pay to bypass ads, get a little bit of extra content, I think that's really exciting.
All of these new things need trailblazers, man. It sounds like that's what's happening right now. You talk about ads and monetization and stuff. Music, right? Back in the day, you go to the record label, they give you some money, you make the thing, they pay for the stuff, you make the money off the record sales. Good. But then independents, how do they do it? They make an album, they put it on Spotify, their mom listens, and they go, cool, thanks for the 0.000000001 pence. How are they making their money? Independent bands. They're going on tour. So what's the equivalent of going on tour for a podcast? Maybe there's not an equivalent. Maybe it is just going on tour. You see a lot of people do podcasting tours. They go very well. That's an example of bringing it into your own ecosystem. It's the same thing as merch. It's also the same thing as the exact thing that you're describing with This American Life. The premium feed still relies on having a big number of listeners to make a significant impact to you, which I suppose is fine. If you have a lot of listeners, it probably means you're delivering a lot of value, whether that's entertainment value or otherwise. That's just a normal meritocracy, right?
Yeah. There's going to be like a correlation there between the value and the quality and how many people are willing to support you. No matter what, you're going to need a lot of listeners, but I think there's a minority of podcasts that they could have 1,000 listeners. 80% of those listeners would support them monetarily. Those people that do love that show really love that show.
It's fine to focus on let's get 1 billion listeners. Focusing on quality means that those 1 billion listeners are more likely to be your super fans. This kind of goes with one of our philosophies, the evolution of fans, where it goes from podcast to show to community to lifestyle. So you've got podcast, which is any old podcast, you give people something awesome, good. Then it evolves into show. Now thinking about structure. What does the morning show, not the TV show, the actual show in the morning, do? They have their specific sections. They always have the chef come on and the chef cooks a thing and then some wacky thing happens. Amazing. That's a show. And then it evolves into a community, which is where you begin to have that dialogue as opposed to a monologue. You have that two-way conversation with your fans. We can all think of shows like that, right? You're beginning to have your true fans. From there, it then evolves into a lifestyle. Point to Joe Rogan. You can draw a Joe Rogan fan. You know what they listen to. You know what they do on the weekend. You probably know what beer they drink, right? That is a lifestyle. And when you get to that lifestyle point, that's when you get those true fans. That's when you get a bunch of people that are going to support you. And it really points towards that, because podcasts are going to have a more difficult time with that type of revenue. Lifestyles are going to have a very easy time with that.
You're starting with the podcast. People are just going to listen to the podcast. But then as they stick around, they're going to start going deeper and deeper into this, where eventually like the earlier part in the funnel is going to broaden out. You're going to get more listeners, but like a listener is like the lowest metric. And then like the people who stick around, who do begin engaging in conversation with you, and then the people who end up supporting you monetarily, it's going to get narrower and narrower, but those are the people that are just much more invested with you, and they're going to stick around for a long time.
When talking about Spotify, they have two things that really help towards that. The first one, people that listen to your show can ask you questions or leave comments on that episode, and then you can reply to the comments. That is creating that community. The second thing is that they have a premium feed type of donate type of thing already set up. So it's like they've already heard this conversation. Man, prediction. Spotify are going to kill the game. That's it.
I think that's a safe prediction, again, unless other people start paying attention, keeping up.
Yeah, you're only on top until you're not. All right, what's next?
Last up, the ABC trialed generative AI to improve podcast titles and descriptions across their entire platform using Microsoft's Copilot. They were studying how they could use AI to improve the quality of their titles and descriptions. What they found was that AI was helpful for generating some ideas, summarizing content, but wasn't particularly creative or original. Human input was still crucial for creating the nuanced and quality content that they expected of themselves. It did show that AI was good as a creative assistant, but it wasn't going to replace anybody. People on the ABC team said they were less concerned about AI replacing their jobs after using it.
Those are the results that I would have expected. As we know, AI is good at some things, but it has its limitations, obviously. They, like AI as a group of people, they have to use what they've been given. Like, admittedly, that's a large sample size, but they still have to use things that have existed and then build upon that, which I guess is what humans are doing as well. It also comes down to the prompts. You have to learn how to prompt it. It doesn't surprise me that they need the human touch at the end. I would say, again, at the start, very useful. Creativity is the last bastion of humankind. Then it goes into the discussion of, is any music truly creative? Is any music truly original? Paul McCartney's music is all from the 50s. I'm sorry, Paul. But that's what it is. It's rehashing stuff that you have there, and it's taking influence, and it's not building thoroughly on that influence. Having said that, it's only a matter of time. At the moment, we're at that point where it can do a 90% job, but we will get to the 100%.
Obviously, this is like a huge button topic all over the board, especially I think in creative industries, which makes sense to me. It sucks that all the jobs that people actually wanted to have are the first ones that we're trying to replace with AI. I would rather, I know I'm saying this to you, you love a good spreadsheet, but I'm like, why can't we get AI just to throw together our spreadsheets for us instead of taking over the creative jobs that people actually like want and are so competitive that we end up getting underpaid for in the first place? Yeah, rant over. The interesting thing here to me is that I think one of the things that sets AI apart from humans is that humans are more illogical a lot of times. Again, I'm speaking to Data here, so I understand.
Did you just refer to me as Data from Star Trek?
I did, yes. What's going to make it hard for AI to get to that 100% is actually the ways in which humans aren't logical. In the same way that like a sociopath can learn how to pretend to have emotion. Okay, I know from looking at other people that like in this situation, I should be sad, so I'm going to act sad, but they don't actually feel sadness. AI is going to be like that really good sociopath, you know? It's never going to actually feel those things and make those like stupid emotional decisions. It's just going to say, I know that I should be a little illogical here, so I'm going to like logically consider how to be illogical.
You seen 2001: A Space Odyssey?
I have, yes.
You know when they're spoiler alerts for a film that came out in, I want to say 1969 or something like that, when he's turning Hal off and Hal's like, no, stop. It hurts. I can feel it. Oh man, amazing scene, first of all, right? What was my point? It's a facsimile of irrationality. That's an album name. Having said that, if people come to us and they go, hello, can you produce our podcast, please? But it turns out that maybe they don't have the budget, or maybe they're a person just trying to build their own podcast. Our advice generally is you can, as a verb, 80% it using free tools. Every single day there's new free tools coming up. Orphonic comes to mind. Maybe not necessarily free, but you've got Descript, you've got stuff like that. And I think that at the moment, AI falls into that category. You could have AI audio, like studio sound on Descript, and you could do an AI edit. I'm sure there's an AI editor out there. AI imagery, copy, get it all done in 20 minutes, and you've got an 80% good enough result there. And I think that's, see, I've started the sentence with, and I think that's, but I don't know how I think about that yet. That's good because it allows more people to be creative and get their thing out there and get started without the need of a production company, right?
Yeah.
However, is there a negative aspect to that?
There's so much to go into here. It evens the playing field a little bit to the point where the message stands out more than how good the production is. It's also just going to raise the standard. If you're not taking advantage of all of these very powerful tools that can get you 80% of the way there, I don't think you're going to stand out. If 80% becomes the floor, that's basically 0% there. And then there's just so much room in between.
That is a great way to think about it. That's what we always say as well. You can get to 80, but a lot of the gold lives in that difference between 80 and 100. Not necessarily even production quality, but you come into things like strategy, what's your goal, stuff like that. And that stuff AI is not very good at. Obviously, it will get there. Hey, there now. We got to keep our eye on these robots, man.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if AI is showing up here every week. But the beautiful thing about it is everyone has access to these tools. ChatGPT, $20 a month, if you choose to pay for it, can take advantage of these things. It just becomes, this is what is expected.
Yeah, it's just becoming so more ingrained in our life. We were talking beforehand, ChatGPT, I use it all the live long day. That little alt space that you can just do that. It's like when Google first came about. Google it. Oh, what a revelation. But you know what? I'm using it all day for little things that is making my life easier. However, I never use it for any type of creative thing. I guess it's because I have the ability to do those things. It's not going to do as good a job as I am.
You're also getting to something here, which is like, why are you doing podcasting in the first place? Yes, sometimes it's a means to an end, but there's typically like a joy in the act of creating something. And typing a prompt into AI and then just copying and pasting whatever comes out, there's no joy in that. It might get you 80% of the way there. Maybe it actually gets you exactly where it would if you did it manually. But if it's not fun, that's something to think about too. I don't think we want to forget that.
Yeah, the obstacle is the way. It's not there yet, but I think it will be. HAL 9000 will live.
Yeah, it's only a matter of time. We'll see how it is when it gets there, right?
All right, I think that's it for this week. Thank you very much for bringing me the news, the industry news. How do I sign this off again?
I have no idea.